Hey guys, welcome. It's Callus. This is SPL playoff content, and this is going to be a little different than my usual. I'm going to try it. I mean, some of you guys like this, some of you guys don't. You're going to have to let me know, but this is going to be more of a breakdown than a play-by-play color commentary. You guys can let me know if you prefer this kind of style or my usual. Please do let me know. I need that feedback to know what to do with the channel going forward. But if this is something you want to see more of, let me know. And if it's not, let me know that too. Let's get to the game. Like I said, big stakes here. This is SPL playoffs. It is Overheat 1, which is just some alt, but that's Roy Stoproar, perhaps better known as Shortage, on the bottom against Gilbert Arenas, terrible name change, better known as Marcop on the top. So very clear, Shortage against Marco P. This is, like I said, playoffs, and Shortage is representing the Cryonicles against Marco, who's representing the Tyrants. I'm not going to get into the score in the series or any of that. It doesn't matter. The only thing I care about is the ADV. All the other stuff is going to be what it's going to be. So let's just focus on this game. Starting with the first turn, we're going to do, like I said, more of a breakdown style. Okay, so Zapdos on Zapdos. These are Zapdos and T-Tower are the two most common and, in my opinion, best leads in ADV. This tells you almost nothing. I would say these days, more commonly than not, Zapdos is the lead of offensive teams, but that's not universally true. The bulky Zapdos with Rest and maybe even Rest Talk does still exist. There are Zapdos stally teams, but I think the most prominent strategy is Zap Doug, so it can BP to the beat up Dugtrio, which just instantly removes walls like Blissey, or if it's adamant, it can beat Jirachi as well, as long as it doesn't get, say, Body Slam paralyzed, or crit, or burnt, or whatever hacks. And another thing is that even if you don't have Dugtrio on offensive teams, Zapdos is still generally the best lead. It just gives you a ton of options on turn one. You can just go aggressive, just immediately T-Bolt. You could throw a status move, Toxic or Thunder Wave at the other guy. Or if they switch, you have the option to BP and control the tempo because you get to BP after they switch and you get to control what the matchup's going to be. Turn one, they obviously, both guys know their own teams. They don't know the opposing team. But looking at this, generally the standard Zapdos on Zapdos play is that they both fling a status move at each other. It's very common that they would both T-Wave here, or maybe it's T-Wave and Toxic. If one of them does have a status move and the other does not, that generally favors the one that does have the status move. But let's see how it plays out. This is complete unknown starting from zero. Okay, so we get some information here. We see a Thunderbolt coming from Marco on the top and a Toxic from Shortage on the bottom. So to me that would indicate that Marco probably doesn't have a status move, otherwise I think it's just better to T-Wave or Toxic there. So the fact that he opts for the Thunderbolt, I think we could start narrowing down the set. I think we might be looking at Thunderbolt, Hidden Power, Baton Pass, Roar is fairly common. In the Roar spot, it could also have Protect, potentially. We also might be looking at, say, Rest Roar, Thunderbolt, Hidden Power, something along those lines for Marco. But I would rule out both T-Wave and Toxic based off this, because like I said, I think he would have simply gone for it. Now on Shortage's end, it's interesting that he has Toxic as opposed to T-Wave. It's not bad by any means. Toxic can be very good, but it just takes you in a different direction. Generally, Thunder Wave is preferable on most offensive teams. Toxic generally is a little more on mid-rangey or stally teams. So I would be thinking now that Shortage's team is perhaps a little more on the defensive side, not necessarily like a hardcore Zap Doug kind of offense, whereas with Marco it's still not as clear, but like I said, I would start ruling out things like Toxic and Thunderwave that I don't think he necessarily has. All things considered, if this is a non-rest Zap, for Marco, then I think this is a good turn for Shortage. If it is a rest zap, then maybe not so much. Not that the Thunderbolt was the end of the world, especially when there's no sand right now, but slight edge on turn 1 if it's a non-rest zap, I think, to Shortage. Second turn, Protect. And he stays in for Thunderbolt again. So, Protect Toxic Zap. If it has Protect, it's not going to have Rest, so I don't know if this is like a hardcore stall necessarily for Shortage, but it still could be a defensive team, like a Skarm, Rachi, Titar kind of thing, like a half Superman hybrid, the kind of thing that Bad Dummy used a lot on ladder in like 2017. Marco, on the other hand, going for Thunderbolt again is interesting. I don't know. That makes me think that it's a rest zap for Marco. It doesn't have to be, but he seems really not concerned about the toxic, because even if he didn't know that there was a protect there on the other end, a lot of the time for Shortage, doesn't like a Swampert or a Claydol or something like that come in. Doesn't something that just eats the Thunderbolt come in here a lot of the time? But Marco really doesn't care. He stays in Thunderbolts again anyway, so he's really not concerned about the toxic. So that to me would indicate that he has either Rest or a Wish user in the back or a Aromatherapy user in the back. I think it's an offensive team for Marco, but I'm not clear yet. It could be a Rest Zap. Marco, I'm not as sure about. I just don't think his Zapdos has status moves. But for Shortage, I think we are looking at something more defensive. Alright, so Flygon coming in, trying to come in on Thunderbolt, and is doing so successfully. So this is clearly a good turn for Shortage. I don't think too much information is gained here, but Marco again representing that he doesn't care about the toxic. So again, think Rest, think Wish, think Aromatherapy, what have you. I feel that a switch to something that doesn't care about Thunderbolt there was fairly obvious, and Marco probably knew that that was a thing. So again, I think he just doesn't really care. And on Shortage's end, the Flygon supports my previously stated theory that I think we're looking at like a hybrid Superman kind of team. Think like Skarm, think maybe Gengar, think Titar, Rachi, that kind of thing. A hybrid half Superman, doesn't care about spikes because half my team flies or levitates kind of squad that was popular a few years ago. There's a double back to Skarm and a BP, and it's going to be Loom. So obviously we can immediately rule out that Marco has a Magneton, because that's an auto BP if he has it there, which he doesn't. Breloom can be found both on very offensive and very defensive teams. I've seen Loom on 4 teams, for example. Now, if Marco had 4 would he go to it here? That's an interesting question. I think he probably already knows what's going on. He can at least see on the other side that there's 3 flying or levitating pokes, so I think he already knows that his spikes are just not that exciting. He could go to 4 here if he had it, but are his spikes that good in this matchup? It looks like one of those matchups where there's going to be like 2 things on the other side that actually care about it. Now, that being said, is it still good to establish spikes? Is it still good to make it so your opponent doesn't get to stick more than 1 layer of spikes? Yeah, it probably is. So it's interesting if it is a 4 TSS for Marco. You could make the argument to go, but I still really don't hate this Loom at all. I think it can just never be bad to not only prevent any spikes whatsoever, because it's going to be a Spore here. So the Skarm is either switching or going to sleep, but either way, it's not spiking this turn. So by doing this, Marco is preventing a spike at all, which can't be a bad thing, and getting the tempo off with the Spore is also a good thing. Maybe that's another reason that the Zapdos here, we haven't actually seen anything other than T-Bolt and BP, but maybe that's another reason that the Zapdos doesn't have a status move, because you don't want to overload with status moves, because then it makes it so the biggest draw of Breloom, by far the best reason to use Breloom, the Spore, has a lot less effect. So like, for example, if he did Thunder Wave the Zapdos on turn 1 or Toxic or whatever, now when he goes for Spore, what's to stop Shortage from just going back to the Thunder Waved Zapdos and just blanking the Spore? It's just kind of an anti-synergy there. So if I weren't already sure, I was pretty confident before, but now I would be basically positive if I were in Shortage's seat that this Zapdos does not have a status move. That doesn't necessarily tell us what the other two moves are. One of them is probably Hidden Power, and like I said, the last one could be Rest, Roar, uh, what's the other move? Rest, Roar, Protect are all the things that the Zapdos could have as the final move. But I'd be almost certain if I were Shortage here that the Zapdos does not have a status move. So what do you do here if you're Shortage? It's hard to say because I don't know his team. He does, I don't, so it gets really hard to make a prediction here as to what you're supposed to do. It is almost certainly Spore here. I would be absolutely shocked if Marco were to go for, say, Focus Punch. That seems really bad. I mean, yeah, you can nail the Scarm with a Focus Punch as it spikes up, but you could also just lose your Breloom instantly with absolutely nothing to show for it if he simply Drill Packs. And likewise, is it that bad of a trade for Skarm to trade the Focus Punch damage for a Spike? I think depending on how vulnerable Marco's team is to Spikes, that actually is probably a fine trade for Shortage to eat the damage just to get a Spike down. So I can't imagine Marco does anything other than Spore here, and I think that Shortage should play accordingly. It is the obvious Spore, and Shortage is going to opt to stay in. I don't think we gain too much information here. Every Breloom in the world is always going to have Spore. Nothing surprising here. There's no Breloom, doesn't exist, that doesn't have Spore. And on the other end, I mean, like I said, it's very hard to know without seeing Shortage's team. He obviously didn't have anything that he preferred to take the Spore. Whether that's good or not good is yet to be determined, depending on what he's reading Marco's team to be. It might be a mistake that it's the Skarm that eats it, because if this is just like a really offensive team with things like, Lax, Metagross, whatever in the back for Marco, then maybe that Spike and maybe the Skarm itself is very good. On the flip side of that, if it is a 4E TSS from Marco, 4E T-Tower with Fire Blast, that kind of thing, then this Skarm is probably really bad in the matchup. So maybe it is the right thing to eat Spore. Have to kind of make a judgment call here. If you're Shortage, he opts to let the Skarm eat it. We'll see if that ends up being a good decision or not. So Zapdos in and Starmie in, which is not a Pokemon I was expecting from Shortage. So I'm not exactly sure anymore what we're looking at here. That still could be, for example, a bulky T-Wave star would be my immediate thought for Shortage. I don't know that maybe an off star makes sense, but I'm trying to fill in what the rest of the team would be for Shortage then. Would it be like a Jirachi and a Tyranitar, I guess, for Shortage? It's interesting that he feels the need to bring Starmie at all here. I mean, he's got at least the three pokes that don't care about spikes, so, and he's not going to bring a spinner for the sake of having two Pokemon only, including the Starmie itself, that care about spikes. So immediately upon seeing this, I would think that it's either simply four attacks, balls to the walls, offensive star, not a spinner at all, or both of the remaining pokes that we haven't seen from Shortage are going to be grounded. They're going to be, like I said, think like a Rachi and a Tar, or a Blissey and a Tar, or something along those lines, because it doesn't make sense to bring a spinner when you literally only have the Starmie itself and one other poke that care about the spikes. It's a waste. There's no point. So it's one of two things. It's either both the remaining pokes are grounded for Shortage, or it is just a full-on no-spin, four attacks, offensive star. Hydro Pump, Ice Beam, Thunderbolt, Psychic, whatever with spikes, I'm going aggro. Those are one of the two things that we're looking at here. The Zapdos coming back in for Marco is not surprising. He's simply depriving his opponent of information. He's got the option to baton pass out, so he's also controlling the tempo. I think this is the right play for Marco. He gives Shortage nothing. He gains information. He doesn't lose information, and he can just BP to whatever he wants. As it happens, the switch worked out even better because, I mean, the Starmie was unrevealed. I don't think Marco was predicting Starmie. But as it turns out, Starmie basically can't stay in here. Maybe an offensive star can get really aggressive here and go for Ice Beam, but I think that's pretty bad. And I think the Starmie's going to have to switch, and Marco's going to get to continue controlling the tempo. Shortage out. There's Rachi. And there is the BP. So this is a fairly standard turn, and now we see meta. Okay, so I think Jirachi, like I said, is the special wall on the team. I think Rachi plus Bliss is very unlikely. I think the last poke is almost certainly T-Tar for Shortage, and this is a hybrid half Superman team for him. I think that rules out offensive star. I think we are looking at an actual spinner. Now, granted, it could be both. It could be like Hydro Pump, Ice Beam, Thunderbolt with Rapid Spin as the last move. It could also be a bulky star with T-Wave, but that looks a little less exciting to me because we know that it's a toxic zapper, and I'm thinking that it's probably a body slam Rachi here, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. It could just be like Calm Mind, 2 attacks, Wish. The Rachi's going to be the special wall in some way, and it can randomly get things with Fire Punch. But like another reason, Flygon almost always carries Toxic. Again, not always, but usually. So I think there could be like an overload of status if this were a Thunder Wave Starmie, so I'm starting to think that that's probably not the case. I think we're looking at either a bulky star with like, say, Rest, or not Rest, Recover, Rapid Spin, Coverage Move, Surf. We could also be looking at Rapid Spin 3 attacks on like a semi-off star with the emergency option to spin. I think either of those is the most likely right now. Okay, so what does it mean on Marco's end that he's bringing in the meta here? I think that it's going to be an offensive team. I guess it could still be a 4E team that's opting to use like the meta, for example, in place of what is traditionally the Swampert spot. So in that case, it would be the last 3 pokes for Marco would be 4E T-Tar Blissey, which, yeah, that's not an awful team. That makes some amount of sense. But I think more likely we're looking at an offensive team. I think Marco might have things like Lax, T-Tar, Salamence, that kind of stuff in the back. I think we're looking at a mixed offense here. He's representing, because he had the choice, remember, to bring anything that he wants on his team into the Rachi here. He's representing that this meta can actually hurt it, so he's representing that he does, in fact, have Earthquake. So, I mean, it could be a bluff, but he's telling us here that he's not mixed meta. So if I were Shortage, I would not think that Marco has something like HP Fire here or Psychic here. I think he could still have HP Grass. Physical sets with HP Grass do exist, and I don't think Shortage needs to worry about that because I think the possibility that his last poke is Swampert is basically zero. It's almost certainly not going to be Swampert for Shortage, so I don't think you care about HP Grass if he has that, and I don't think he's going to have HP Fire or Psychic. I think he's clearly representing here, again, could be a bluff, but clearly indicating that he does have Earthquake, and Psychic and HP Fire are not found on Earthquake sets. So he's representing some kind of physical meta, whether that is a bulky one with Protect, whether that's an Agile Gross, whether that's a CB Gross. He is representing some kind of physical meta here, and I would expect Shortage to play accordingly. He might regret right now letting that Skarm take the Spore. I think it would be a great opportunity now because, like I said, there's no way this meta has HP Fire if it is, in fact, packing Earthquake. So I think that the Skarm would be very safe here and could probably set up a spike or two. So Shortage now might be regretting letting the Skarm take the Spore. It's an interesting turn for Shortage without knowing the set. It could just be a Protect turn if it's that kind of Rachi. If it is not a Protect Rachi, for example, if it's Calm Mind, 2 attacks, and Wish, it gets a little tricky here. Can you eat an Earthquake from an Agile Gross to get a Wish off? Yeah, you can, but like, what if it's a CB Gross, or what if he randomly crits you here? It gets a little tricky. I think in the vast majority of situations, to avoid getting absolutely rocked by a prediction, I think you're going to see Shortage stay in here one way or another, whether it's to Wish or to Protect. I think there's a world that you can argue going back to Zapdos here if you're Shortage. I think that it's very, very unlikely that Marco clicks Rock Slide here. First of all, most meta, the vast majority of meta do not have Rock Slide, and even if he does have it, which, like I said, to begin with is fairly uncommon, I think it's really hard to click Rock Slide here with the Flygon and with the Rachi here, especially when there are consequences. Rachi here conceivably could just go for Fire Punch, do some damage, maybe you get burned. I think Rock Slide is almost zero here, so there is a world where you go to Zapdos here and you think that what's the worst that's going to happen? An Earthquake, a Meteor Mash, that's okay. But I also think to be safe, you're going to see Shortage stay in a high percentage of the time here. So it's the double back from Marco, which I think I agree with, and it's a protect from Shortage. So that basically tells us the whole set. That tells us it's one of two sets now for Shortage. We're looking at protect, body slam, fire punch, wish, or in place of the body drum. It's like belly drum only with your body. In place of the body slam slot, we could be looking at toxic. So it's going to be either way. It's going to be protect, wish, fire punch, and then the last move is either toxic or body slam for the Rachi. It's going to be very bulky. It's going to be, like I said, the special wall roll for the team. And again, I like how Marco played that. I think you pull back there. I think that not a lot of good was going to come out of that turn. I think basically the only time you stay in is if you're CB meta, and like even then maybe you don't stay in because even CB Earthquake, exactly what just happened, it gets protected against, you lose your tempo, or he goes to Zapdos, you lose your tempo. I don't think there was a lot of upside there. I think the whole point of going meta into the Rachi in the first place for Marco was to basically scout what the Rachi would do and just to gain information, or maybe the Rachi is a difficult poke for Marco to deal with. But in either scenario, I don't think the meta had anything meaningful to do there, and I think I agree with the switch. So we'll see what Shortage wants to do now. I think Marco, I mean, he accomplished the goal, right, of getting the information. He now knows what the Rachi is, or at least very, very close to what the Rachi is. Like I said, it's going to be just one of those two sets. So we'll see what he wants to do from here. I don't see a lot of incentive just staying in and trying to Thunderbolt. We just saw the Protect from the Rachi. Very well may Protect again, try to milk toxic damage. Now, I don't think Shortage should Protect again. I think a lot of players would, but I think it's a misplay. I think that not only is the Zapdos basically a non-threat to this Rachi here, he should have ruled out the status move by now, so the only move that you at all give a shit about if you're Shortage, which is Thunder Wave, is almost certainly not going to happen here. The Zapdos, I'd be damn close to positive, does not have that. And likewise, because it's a guaranteed protect on this turn against a poisoned opponent, the protect is so obvious that I think you should not do it. I think this is a great opportunity for Shortage to get a free fire punch or body slam off here. Personally, if I were Shortage on this turn, I would fire punch. That's what I think he should do. Whether he will or not, I don't know, but that would be my play, and then I would expect Marco to simply BP back out. Flygon is interesting, and it is BP, so it's hard to say how a Fire Punch would have worked out there. Uh, obviously, if the Rachi had stayed in, maybe Marco would have switched to something other than Coon. Hard to say. I feel like a Fire Punch probably would have been better there because it's just really, really safe. There's not going to be anything that you don't want to Fire Punch. If you randomly get the burn, fantastic. But if you don't really lose anything. Whereas this way, I feel like Shortage does come out on the losing end. I feel like it's very hard to stay here. If you are Shortage, you can push your luck and go for a Toxic here, I guess, but you're begging for an Ice Beam, and even if he doesn't have the Ice Beam, this very well could just be a Crow Coon or a traditional Combine Surf, Rest Roar Coon. Either way, I mean, the Toxic, which is the best upside for the Flygon, it doesn't seem super worth it. This Coon is either just going to kill you if it's an offensive Coon with Ice Beam, or it's going to be a Rest Coon that ultimately doesn't really care about the Toxic other than being forced to rest a little bit earlier. So I think it is a lot of risk and not a lot of reward for Shortage. I think he should basically never stay in this situation. Now for Marco, it's an interesting turn because the Flygon should not stay here. Do you even Ice Beam if you're Marco? Like, even if you have Ice Beam, do you just Calm Mind here? Do you just sub here if it's that kind of Coon? I think Calm Mind, you can't go too far wrong. At the same time, you could certainly argue if you think you're going to be forced out by whatever comes in, maybe you should just Ice Beam here. Maybe you should just take a shot in the dark and see if you can find a freeze. It's an interesting turn. I don't know the full set for Marco, but I think that Calm Mind or Ice Beam are basically the only moves we're ever going to see here. I can't see too much of a reason to find a Surf here. If you think that the Starmie's coming in, I think you just Calm Mind. If you think that the Rachi's coming in, I don't think the Surf is very meaningful. If you're planning to stay in on the Rachi, you might as well start Calm Minding up. If you think the Scarm is coming in, I think Calm Mining and then Surfing is better than just Surfing, so I don't see a reason to find a Surf here. I think that Calm Mind or Ice Beam or Switch, but probably Calm Mind or Ice Beam are the only things you're going to see from Marco here, and I really don't think Shortage should stay in. I don't know, again, without knowing the full sets, what necessarily comes into Kuhn. It might just be the Rachi, but I definitely would disagree if the Flygon were to stay in here, fish for an Earthquake crit, go for a Toxic. I think Flygon should basically always get out of the way. Goes back to Zapper, and it's a Calm Mind turn. This is a little scary for both players. +1 Ice Beam here would do a ton. It may or may not kill, depending on the spread of both pokes. Marco, on the other hand, again, depending on the spread of both pokes, the Thunderbolt, despite the presence of the Calm Mind boost, could still do quite a bit here to this Coon. This is where it kind of sucks as a commentator. I don't know either team, so it's hard to know what either player should do here. There's definitely some teams where Marco should accept this trade, eat a potential Thunderbolt, and get the Ice Beam off here. And there's other times where he definitely shouldn't. Of note for Marco, it doesn't look like there's really a great Zapdos switch in general. If this is just a boring, mixed offense team, which I think is one of the best archetypes in the meta right now. By boring, I'm not saying it's bad, it's just generic. But if this is a mixed offense here for Marco, generally these teams don't switch into Zapdos super well. There still could be something like a Lax or a Rachi in the back, which you could definitely go Lax here if you have that. It eats the Thunderbolt fine. There's no sand. It gets lefties. It handily beats Zapdos 1v1 when there's no lefties. When there are lefties, rather, because there's no sand. It gets a little bit tricky because most Lax, maybe it is Fire Blast or Focus Punch or whatever, but most Lax can't beat Scarm. The Scarm is asleep, however, so Lax is kind of iffy here, but Scarm is just not really a poke that it wants to see. It could begin cursing up, but again, when the Scarm wakes up, it'll just blow it away. It's hard to know what to do here. I think it's basically an obligatory Thunderbolt if you're Shortage, so on his end, I think it's a pretty straightforward turn. But it's not so clear what to do if you're Marco. I could definitely, if he has Ice Beam, see the argument for staying in and accepting that. If he does have a Lax, then that's a very safe route defensively, but he's going to lose a lot of his tempo by doing that because it's going to get walled by the Scarm. So it's a Surf here, so almost certainly he doesn't have Ice Beam. And it's a Roar here from Shortage. Oh, that's a really interesting turn. That worked out really well for Marco, actually. So, Toxic, Protect, Roar, and last move is obviously going to be T-Bolt, so we now know that there's no hidden power here from Shortage, which, again, I think the possibility of it being last poke Swampert for Marco is basically zero, so the lack of hidden power grass isn't going to matter in this matchup. But that actually was a really good turn for Marco. It's a result-oriented statement. I don't know if either one made the right or the wrong play, but the way that it did play out, Marco definitely got the better end of that. He got free damage off, and the ideal thing for Marco, which was this previously unrevealed Lax, does get roared out. So that's going to be bad for Shortage. He is definitely going to get out of the way here. We know the last move is Thunderbolt. He could protect here if he just wants to get lefties, but I don't like protecting here because you're just giving the Lax a free curse if he is that set. Marco here could body slam or curse depending on what he thinks he's going to do. I don't see a reason not to curse. The only reason you don't curse is if you think the Zapdos is going to roar again, and that just seems like a fundamentally bad play because you're just begging to eat a body slam. So I think there's no reason not to curse here if you're Marco, and I think that puts Shortage in a weird spot. Now, again, depending on what the full set is, if it's Curse EQ, he's really in business because that would punish the Rachi as well. If he's Curse but not EQ, so like a more traditional, say, Curse, Shadow Ball, Body Slam, Rest, that's a little iffier, but it's the same issue as before in that he can't actually beat the Scarm. So the fact that he'd be bringing what is potentially a Curse Lax and not a Magneton against, Scarm, because Scarm is going to just be a thing sometimes, that would make me think that he's a self-destruct set, because Curse, Body Slam, EQ Rest without Magneton, / without Pursuit makes zero sense. And yeah, and same thing. The Shadow Ball set without a way to remove Scarm, specifically Magneton, also makes zero sense to me. So I would think that it's just a utility lax. If it shows Curse, I would be very weary if I'm shortage of Self-Destruct. I don't like the Protect there for shortage, and that's the exact reason why, because it's just a free opportunity there for Marco to Curse. I think that, I mean, you do gain something. You gain lefties if you're shortage there, but I don't think it's a good trade. I don't think gaining the lefties one time in exchange for the curse is a good trade-off, and I think that other than lefties, Zapdos doesn't really gain anything and has to get out of the way now. A +1 body slam would be very devastating here, and a normal attack is almost certainly coming here if you're Marco. It's now almost certainly going to be body slam or potentially return if he has that instead. I guess if you're EQ lax, you can try to get cute here and predict the Rachi and go for EQ, but I think I really dislike that because I think Scarm comes in the vast majority of the time here, so I think almost certainly Marco will just go body slam or return here, and I think that Shortage is basically obligated to go to Scarm. I don't see a reason to Rachi here, even if it is just body slam. You're begging to get parried, which he's not going to be able to remove. And then I don't know that Rachi, especially with no sand in play, actually beats Lax. I would say the vast majority of the time it does not. So there's the Scarm. And Earthquake from Marco. I do not like that from Marco. I think it was just always going to be Scarm here from Shortage. I think that was literally predicting one thing only, right? Because against any of the Flyers or Levitators, the Earthquake does actual nothing. And against the Starmie, the normal attack, again, whether it's Body Slam, Return, Frustration, whatever it is, would have been better. So that's going to give me the only other thing I can think of, the only other thing worth noting here is if it simply doesn't have a normal attack. Marco's a creative guy, and there are bait sets that don't actually have that. It could be some funky like Curse, Earthquake, Shadow Ball, Self Destruct, or Curse, Earthquake, Shadow Ball, Focus Punch, or something along those lines. It might not actually have a traditional normal attack. That would be a little funky if so. I still don't know that I like the Earthquake because I still think, I mean, certainly I don't think he has Focus Punch, right? Because Scarm is just always coming in there. And even if you are predicting Rachi, you still want a +1 Focus Punch there. So I think I would rule that out. So I think that's either a play that I simply don't agree with from Marco if he does have a normal attack, or we could be looking at Curse, Earthquake, normal attack, boom, or Curse, Earthquake, Shadow Ball, boom, which would explain why he didn't go for the normal attack there. But I definitely think if he does have a Body Slam or Return or Frustration, I think those were the play. I think the Earthquake was literally one thing and one thing only, and I don't think Rachi was ever coming in there. I think it was basically always going to be the Scarm. So he's going to stay in, kill a sleep turn. Why wouldn't you? And it is a boom set, which makes a lot of sense because, like we discussed, he's bringing Curse EQ doesn't have Magneton, doesn't seem to have a Pursuit user. It's got to just be boom. Otherwise, the Lax is just very wallable, overly wallable. So I think the self-destruct there was not too hard to see coming. For Shortage, I don't think you could fault him too much there. I mean, first of all, he didn't know the self-destruct was necessarily that turn, though he could have, because that is the right play for Marco. You don't want to let the Scum wake up and get some spikes down. And even if he did know that it is definitely self-destruct that turn, is the Scum the right target to eat the boom? I don't know. You could make an argument, maybe, that the 49% Zapdos should have eaten it instead. I still think that the Zapdos has value. I think with no sand right now, they both do still have an unrevealed, and it very well could be tower for one or both players. But there is no sand right now, so the Zapdos can nurse itself up even further with those protects and getting lefties, and I think the Zapdos is difficult to switch into, especially with the Lax down for Marco, so I do think that the Lax still has value for Shortage, the Zapdos rather, so I don't think he should have let the Zapdos go. And then, yeah, I mean, Flygon at a Hundo seems like a weird target. Maybe the Starmie's not that exciting in this matchup, depending on the set. Again, if it's off Star, I think that could be tricky to switch into for Marco. But if it is something a little more tame, if it's just like a defensive Surf, Thunderbolt, Rapid Spin Recover Star, for example, I think that's not that exciting. So maybe that could have eaten the boom. And I definitely don't think you give up the Rachi. So I think that on Shortage's end, he either makes the right play here by letting the Skarm eat it, or maybe you consider going to Starmie here if it's just like I said, Surf, Thunderbolt, Rapid Spin Recover, defensive, or something along those lines, because I think that's pretty underwhelming here. And then if it is Last Poke Tower, you can make the argument that maybe that should have eaten it. Plus one self-destruct still would have done a ton, possibly even killed it, depending on the spread. So I don't think I love that, even though it does resist it. I think that the Skarm itself or the Starmie were the correct things to get blown up here, because you know the Starmie as a spinner has zero purpose. There's no chance that at this point that it's Last Poke 40 or something for Marco. It's just not that kind of team. It's clearly offense. So you can argue whether you let the Starmie eat it there or not. I think that one's less clear cut than some of the other plays. I think that one's a little bit more debatable. I don't hate letting the Skarm eat it. I just hope he doesn't regret not having the Skarm as a wall later on against things like the Metagross and the Breloom that are both going to be strictly physical. Certainly the Loom is going to be. We haven't actually seen anything from the meta, but it was either a nice bluff from Marco or him telling Shortage that it is just physical. I'm expecting a physical meta, but you can also argue that on this kind of team that isn't bringing a spinner, that isn't bringing a Magneton, that all the pokes need to be able to hurt Skarm on their own, so it totally could be a mixed meta by that logic. Earlier he indicated that it wasn't. I'm going to stick with that until I'm shown otherwise, but I still... Maybe the Skarm could have had value as a wall. You can also argue, who knows, maybe it wouldn't have woken up for 2-3 more turns. Maybe that's just not good enough. I don't hate letting the Skarm eat it, but I'm not 100% convinced it was right either. So we'll see how they both follow up. Zapdos makes sense to me, and Zapdos for both. So I think this makes sense. I think Marco wants the option to baton pass out, and I think that Shortage wants to nurse his Zapdos back up and protect and BP respectively, bringing out an unsurprising Last Poke T-Tar. That's clearly universally the right thing no matter what the set is for Marco to pass to at this point, because it's free and it sets up the sand and it prevents the Zapdos, which is definitely a threat because now we know that Marco doesn't have a good defensive switch into it. The Zapdos is an offensive threat by just spamming Thunderbolts. So we definitely want to put a clock on it and not let that heal up any more than it already has. So it's at 56%. Here comes T-Tar. I don't see much reason to find a... yeah, I take that back. I was going to say not a great reason to see a Crunch Pursuit Tar, but I could see it. I mean, if it's like a strictly... We've only seen Spore, but if it's like a strictly physical Loom, for example, if we're looking at the 3 fighting attacks, like the Mach, Sky Uppercut, Focus Punch set, or if we're looking at like an old school Sub-Seed Focus Punch, those are things that hate Gengar. If it is a strictly physical meta that also really doesn't love Gengar, Kuhn, generally speaking, doesn't love Gar. This could be non-Shadow Ball Lax that doesn't love Gar. So actually, my initial thought was just DD because it's a really aggressive team, but the more that I relook at it, I actually think this very well might be a special Tar, Crunch Pursuit Tar, which Zapdos, of course, can pass to. It's not a trapper in the traditional sense of Magneton or Dugtrio, where they make it so you actually can't switch, even if you want to. But it is a pseudo trapper, and that if you get it in on Gar, or maybe even on like a slow Claydol, you can get some kills with the Crunch Pursuit, whether they like it or not. So I think we actually are probably looking at a special Tar for Marco, and that's potentially awkward for Shortage. I'm not sure what I would do here in his shoes, especially if it is an Ice Beam Tar, which is like medium. It's not like super common, but it's not super uncommon either. The Nightmare set, I don't know if Marco is going to have that. Your opponent doesn't always just have exactly what they're supposed to have, but if Marco had hypothetically Crunch Pursuit, Ice Beam, Fire Blast here, that is the Nightmare scenario for Shortage. I mean, what switches into that? Zapdos and Flygon hate the Ice Beam. Starmie hates the Crunch. Rachi hates the Fire Blast. Maybe Rachi can stall the T-Tar out of Fire Blast with Protect and Wish and all that. It does only have the 8 PP, but that would be a very menacing set for Shortage if that's the case. Now, most of these do carry HP Grass. They also can carry Roar. I think that exact set that I just said, while it does exist, Crunch, Pursuit, Fire Blast, Ice Beam, is not the most likely scenario here. But this is tricky for Shortage. I don't feel... Do you stay in here? Do you risk the Ice Beam? Do you eat the Crunch? I mean, you don't really... You don't have a lot of upside to that if you're Shortage. What are you going to do? Toxic him? That doesn't seem like a good trade. So Shortage, I think, has to tread very carefully here. I think a lot of the time you're going to see him go to Rachi, and that definitely carries risk. Crunch, it takes fine, it takes okay, it takes it neutrally, but Fire Blast would do a ton. Marco does not necessarily predict and go Fire Blast here. It's awkward to go Fire Blast into the pressure poke of Zapdos, especially when it wouldn't kill it. But if Marco does make that prediction and the Rachi does come in on a blast, assuming it connects, this is going to maybe go downhill fairly quickly. One argument to make here, if you're Shortage, if his last poke is Tyranitar, which I still think it is, maybe you just go to your own T-Tar here. Again, mixed sets do exist. I think that Brick Break is really scary, but if it is an HP Grass Tar for Marco, I think the chances that it goes for HP Grass here are effectively zero. There's no way that it's last poke Swampert, and I don't see Marco randomly predicting a blind T-Tar here and going for grass, and it wouldn't even do that much if you're right. So I think there's an argument to be made for Shortage. If your last poke is Tar, you just go to that. I don't think it's going to be a Brick Break set, because the problem with Crunch Pursuit Brick Break sets, they do exist. There are mixed sets, but the problem with that is if you get Will-O-Wisp by the Gar that you're trying to trap, which happens a lot, then your Brick Break becomes effectively useless. Like, your Brick Breaks just don't even do meaningful enough damage to the T-Towers and the Blissies, which is the whole point of why you have Brick Break. So if it's going to be a mixed set with Brick Break, it almost always is going to either have a different way to get Gengar, or it's going to have an aromatherapy user in the back. So we'll see what happens, but I really don't think it's going to be Brick Break from Marco. So I think that Shortage, even though it's kind of a weird play, should strongly consider going to his own Tyranitar here if that's his last poke, which I think it is. Not positive, but that would be my guess if I had to speculate. It also could just be something like a Coon for Shortage as the last poke, which he should go to that. So if it's Coon or T-Tar, I think Shortage should go to those. Yep, pulls it back to the Pursuit. All right, that was unlucky. That was a crit Pursuit, so that was a very poor turn for Zapdos. Remember, he had to switch, not BP there. He didn't have the option to BP. So I like the play that Shortage made. I think going to his own T-Tar was correct, and I think that, I mean, the crit there sucked. Don't get me wrong, that Pursuit was always going to do a lot, but I think it is the difference between killing it or not killing it, the fact that he got a crit. So I think the right play there for Shortage, and probably for Marco as well. You can't go too far wrong pursuing there. Zapdos is basically never going to stay in. If he does stay in, you can just double pursuit him down. So I think that was the right play for both guys. Not a lot to say about that turn. Pursuit was right, switching was right, and critical hit sucks to suck. Part of Pokemon. But down goes the Zap, and you've got to think Marco is the lead now, right? I mean, the Zapdos was a pretty nice offensive threat for Shortage. It's just flat out 5-4 advantage now, and one of the better Pokemon down, so Marco definitely has to be ahead now. But depending on what kind of T-Tar this is, because I really, really, really don't think Marco's going to have Brick Break, depending on what T-Tar this is for Shortage, this could turn the game around real fast. If it's DD or if it's a mixed set and he, fire blasts here thinking the Loom or the meta is going to come in, there's a lot of bad things that could happen here for Marco. So we are definitely not over yet. Zapdos is the switch, probably as fodder, and Ice Beam. So predicting either the Zapdos or the Loom there. I don't know what to make of that if I were looking at this from Marco's point of view. That could just be DD Ice Beam, which is an older set, not super popular, but it's definitely a thing. And I think Ice Beam makes a lot of sense, right? We know the Zapdos for Marco or for Shortage did not have HP Ice or Hidden Power at all, but that's irrelevant. I think we basically know the Rachi set, even though we've only seen Protect. I think it's really, really unlikely that it has Ice Punch. The Starmie we don't know. It may or may not have Ice Beam. But basically, because there's no bulky water here, and because even though Zapdos, who can learn HP Ice, or Rachi, who can learn Ice Punch, they both didn't have it. So there's no bulky water, and there's those two factors. So I think there's a lack of ice moves, anti-dragon moves on the team for Shortage. So I think it makes a lot of sense that whether it's DD or whether it's mixed or whatever, that this T-Tower was going to have Ice Beam. On the flip side of that, does the Starmie have Ice Beam? We still don't know. Could be spin 3 attacks, like I said, or it could just be a boring rapid spin recover 2 attacks. Not so sure about the Starmie. If it is an off star, I note again that could absolutely be a threat in the late game for Marco, especially had he gotten spikes down, which he did not. But the Ice Beam there is interesting, and I think you just attack again. Not necessarily Ice Beam, but I think you stay in here if you're Shortage. Maybe you crunch. If it is a DD set, you can argue that it's a DD turn, I suppose, but I think you're supposed to just attack again. There's always bad things that can happen. You can Rock Slide or Ice Beam into, say, the Metagross, but I think the vast majority of the time here you're going to see Shortage stay in and attack again. Not so clear as to what Marco does here. He might just BP out. I don't think there's a lot of benefit to staying in and Thunderbolting and just letting the Zapdos die, so I think he BPs most of the time. But Shortage, I think, should almost certainly attack again, in one form or another. Hidden Power, so he's just going to get some chip damage on the Tar on the way out. And it is Ice Beam again, which I think is wise because he doesn't reveal a whole heck of a lot of anything. Still keeping Marco guessing, but now it gets a little bit scary. We haven't actually seen anything other than Spore from the Loom, but you have to switch if you're Shortage, right? I mean, Loom is so tricky in these late game scenarios. It sucks because nothing's asleep because the Skarm's dead, so Marco here could Spore something and just get a flat out advantage from doing so. That's obviously really, really good in these tight late game scenarios where it's 4 to 4. Sky Uppercut would kill here. Mach, I think, would kill here, or at least be a roll to kill. I mean, you could Focus Punch, but that's high risk, high reward, I suppose. Once again, as with the previous time with Loom, if you're not sure, just click Spore. You can't go too far wrong, and it doesn't look like Shortage has a great switch for that. Depending on what kind of Starmie it is, if it has something like Psychic or Ice Beam, that can fend off the Breloom, but the trade-off, of course, is you have to get something spored first to do that. Alternatively, you can let the Starmie itself get spored, but that runs the risk of the Loom having HP Ghost, HP Bug, things along those lines, and if the Starmie is your only meaningful answer to the Loom, that's not where you want to be. So again, I think Marco, even though it's a 4 to 4, I think Marco is a little bit ahead right now. I think he's got the key tempo, and I think that the Spore is coming basically no matter what from Marco, and I don't know what I would do in this position if I'm Shortage. You let the Flygon eat it, maybe. The Flygon doesn't seem that exciting. It probably loses to the Coon. We don't think Coon is Ice Beam, but it still probably loses. It doesn't take Sky Uppercuts or Focus Punches very well at all from the Loom, so I don't think it beats that. And it's not a physical tar from Marco. We see that it's special, so not only may it have Ice Beam, but even if it doesn't, you don't use the Flygon as a physical tar check the way that you would if it were, say, a DD tar. So I think the least valuable poke for Shortage is the Flygon, and I think if you're going to have something eat the Spore here, I think Flygon is the guy that you want to try to eat it. So I don't love it, but I think the only play here, if you're Shortage, is to go to the Flygon and hope that's the guy that gets spored. Goes to the Starmie. I don't know about. I mean, again, he knows the set and I don't. That's obviously very crucial information, but I don't know about that. I mean, I guess maybe the thought process for Shortage here is if he anticipates that the follow-up from Marco is HP Bug or HP Ghost, maybe he chooses now as the time to double back to the Flygon, eats the HP Bug, eats the HP Ghost, and then maybe scares the Loom off with the possibility of I'm choice band, I'm faster than you, but I mean, what are you even representing there? Not only is it probably not choice band gone, but even if it is, it doesn't have HP flying. Come on, man, nobody's going to believe that. The Loom might just stay in and just spore again. You can go to the Rachi. Again, on a double, you can go, okay, it's going to be HP Ghost here, HP Bug here, I'm going to switch to Rachi. That's fine, that probably works, but come on, it's Protect Rachi. It's not going to be fast. Marco's going to know that his Loom is faster in that scenario. He's just going to Spore again if you go to Rachi here. I don't see what you gain here from going to Starmie. Is he hoping to immediately wake and get him with Ice Beam? Is he hoping that the Breloom tries to get cute here, goes for like Focus Punch, and then he just bam, wake up, gets him with Ice Beam or Psychic? I guess that could be the thought process, but I think this was a mistake for Shortage. We don't know the exact set on the Starmie or the Flygon, but this seems wrong. I think that I stand by what I said before. I think letting the Flygon eat the Spore is better. Then you use the Starmie to deal with the Breloom, but I don't see the follow up here now for Shortage. I mean, no matter what it has, whether it's sub Focus Punch, whether it just starts firing off Focus Punches, whether it goes HP Bug, HP Ghost, I don't see what the follow up is now for Shortage unless his plan is I wake up and I get there, which, I mean, sometimes that's what you have to do. Sometimes you just have to play for BS like that, but I don't know this game. I think Marco's ahead, but I don't think this game is so dire. I don't think Shortage is so dead in the water where he has to play for something mathematically improbable like that. Insta-wake, get you with Ice Beam, get you with Psychic. I don't think you play for desperation stuff like that until you're at the point where you absolutely have to. So I stand by that I don't like this from Shortage, and I would have just gone to Flygon there, but we'll see how Marco follows up. And I would risk it if I'm Marco. I would go HP Bug or Ghost here if I'm him, even if you think there's Ice Beam or Psychic on the other side. Substitute. Okay, so Spore Sub, obviously going to have Focus Punch. The only question becomes, is it last move Leech Seed, which is an old school set, which makes sense with a Pursuit Tower, or is it just a coverage move? Is it just HP Bug? Is it just HP Ghost? But this is one of the multiple scenarios in which this Starmie play from Shortage was not good. Now, even if he does wake, Marco is safe behind the sub, and the Starmie is about to start taking, at best, Focus Punches, which are going to do a lot, and at worst, something like an HP Bug or an HP Ghost, which is just going to absolutely rock his socks off. But even as it is, I think Focus Punch, unless this is the bulkiest of the bulkiest Starmie, which that doesn't make sense because why are you bringing it in? Why are you bringing it in against Loom? If it were like a bulky Surf T-Wave Star with bold and tons of defense, then it doesn't actually beat the Loom anyway, so it doesn't make a lot of sense. But on a normal star, something a little less bulky, something with Ice Beam or Psychic or whatever, these Focus Punches are going to comfortably two-hit KO. So don't want to be a broken record, but I really don't like this whole line from Shortage. I think Flygon was better, and I think this is going to really cost him, possibly cost him the whole game. I don't think he's going to like the way that the Starmie takes the Focus Punches here. They're going to do a lot. Here it comes. Does not wake. And yeah, 36%. That's, I mean, it's a 3-hit KO, but that's pretty hefty. I guess the plan for Shortage at this point, he's kind of resigned to it. He's gonna wake up and recover. I mean, at very least, the Loom is not using HP Bug or HP Ghost, so there's a glimmer of hope here. But even if he does wake up and recover, he's just gonna get spored again soon after. At this point, I think they both they pick their path, and you just have to follow it. At this point, I think Shortage is resigned to the position that he's in, where he just has to stay in here, hope he wakes, get her cover off. And for Marco, you obviously are not switching out from behind a substitute in the scenario. You're obviously Focus Punching again, so straightforward turn. Shortage stays in, Marco Focus Punches. Starmie stays asleep. And all right, last move revealed. We've got ourselves a Leech Seed for Marco, which is going to make this from difficult to impossible. The Starmie is now never beating this Loom, and I think I think Shortage is really in trouble now. I think he's going to really get punished for the way that he played this whole thing. I think it would be completely different right now if he had let the Flygon eat the Spore. We now know that the Starmie takes the Focus Punch is fine, could have rapid spun away the Leech Seeds, gives no fucks about anything this Breloom is doing, would have walled this Breloom all day, and it's now playing out totally differently. I think Shortage is really, really gonna be punished for having the Starmie as opposed to the Flygon eat the Spore, and I think Marco is probably going to be able to snowball this into a match win. Focus Punch again, why wouldn't you? And to be fair to Shortage, it is a long, unluckily long sleep for him, but I think it's hard to complain about luck when I think he flat out misplayed, and here we are, 100% Loom, 6% Sleeping Starmie, due to wake up, but I mean, is that really enough at this point? There's Recover, but he has to keep eating these Focus Punches. Yeah, there's a crit. Wham bam, thank you ma'am. Starmie out of here, and I think Shortage in real trouble. You're now looking at a Loom behind a sub that's just going to Spore here for free. There it is. And yeah, Marco even stating in the comments at this point, he knows he's got this one. He knows this is over. I mean, I've stopped going turn by turn because I think at this point it's relatively straightforward. I think Shortage made a game-losing mistake, and we're now just going through the motions. There's no good way out of this. You're not switching T-Tower into Focus Punch. That gets you nowhere. You're not switching Flygon into Focus Punch. It maybe eats one, but then it just dies to another one because the Loom's comfy behind its sub. We are just going through the motions here, but this Loom is now going to clean up Shortage, and one more time, last time I'm going to harp on it, I promise. I think this whole thing is a result of him letting the Starmie, as opposed to the Flygon, eat the Spore. I'm not saying that I or anyone else is anywhere near perfect. I'm not trying to shit on Shortage. I think he's a really good ADV player. But I think that was just flat out a mistake. It's a mistake that myself or anybody else could have made. But it's hard to make it in a huge playoff situation like this. And it's going to cost him the whole game. It's unfortunate, but he has only himself to blame. I think even though he was behind and very well may have lost anyway, I think this was way, way, way more winnable had he done it the other way. I think he basically lost when he allowed the Starmie to eat it, and that's the way that it played out. There's a turn or two left in this ordeal. Marco can easily sub-stall him out here, focus punch him down, however he wants to kill him. Style points. Gonna kill him with a substitute. That's kind of insult to injury, but it'll do. One more turn, and we're Dunyan rings here. So Marco's gonna win. All right, for 33 turns, that took way longer than I thought that it would. I guess sometimes I talk too much. I'm not going to do these videos all the time because they simply take too much time. I could have done 3 normal games in the amount of time it took me to do this game, but let me know in the comments if you guys prefer this kind of analysis or not. Like I said, even if you do, I'm not going to do it all the time, but if you would like some of these occasionally, more turn by turn, more analytical, more trying to, I guess, coach, for lack of a better word, trying to provide information. If you guys like that style, let me know in the comments. And if you don't, if you want my boring, typical color commentary and telling you what's going on the screen, I can do that too. Let me know what makes you happy and I'll do that. But if you did at all like this video, please do give me a thumbs up. It helps me, helps the channel, all that good stuff. And I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.